Welcome to a new episode of How It Works with Holger, a very special episode, because today we're just going to look at a tiny little piece of an application that we've developed in a previous episode of How It Works with Holger. To be specific, we created an image gallery, but that's not really important. You don't need to have watched the previous videos. This is completely independent. What I would like to talk about today is mobile-ready development of your user interface. I made a common mistake that you learn, I guess, as I'm not a web developer per se. I made the mistake to forget one of the golden rules that you usually learn as a web developer. You build your user interface from mobile up. What this means is that you start with the mobile view and then go over to wider display sizes for desktop, for example. However, take this advice with a grain of salt. For example, think of a navigation bar. If you were to build that up mobile first, you would start with the hamburger menu and then writing the code to get it for the desktop view. That might not be the best approach. So take all the advice that are supposed to be general statements with a little bit of grain of salt, because it doesn't always turn out to be true. So even though in this case it would have been better to build the mobile view first and then build the desktop view, it's not always the case. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I press F12 to get into my developer console, and I already enabled the mobile view. You can get it by clicking on this tiny little icon here. This is the normal view, and if I click on this, I get the mobile view, and this also allows you to do throttling, to basically make it slower. You can turn the device for landscape mode, all that kind of stuff. But the interesting stuff that we want to focus on today is what happens if I change the width of our device. So what does this page show? It shows the top of the image gallery that allows me to search for images, and I can click the buttons for a command. The thing that I completely forgot is if I resize this, let's see what happens. The text becomes smaller, smaller, smaller. The buttons take over, and it is not really a good view on mobile devices. Obviously, there is no mobile device like this. No mobile device is only 63 pixels wide. However, this is a pretty realistic display size. Even this is. So this doesn't make any sense to only allow this little space here. And if you want to Google, for example, for Dortmund, as I did in the example, you can't see anything. So what did I do wrong? Well, what I did wrong is I did not consider the fact that I could have a mobile device with a width that is significantly smaller than this. And I also made the mistake to pick a so-called input group. Right here, the edit control is tied to the buttons. So what I need to do is I need to separate the buttons from the input control and then pick mobile responsive classes in my CSS using Bootstrap that allow me to create the behavior that I intend. And the behavior that I intend is as follows. So I prepared a second file, and I'll load this into my browser. Here we go. And we see right away that the edit control or the input control is no longer tied to the buttons. They're separate. See, there's a gap here. And now, again, going into the mobile view, it immediately flips over. So if this is the desktop view, I make it smaller. At first, the buttons resize a little bit, but the edit control always stays at a certain size that makes sense. And as soon as I go beyond a certain point, so the media breakpoint here is 765, which I think, if I remember correctly, is the medium breakpoint, or large. We'll see that in code really soon. It stacks. The edit text stacks with the buttons. And that's perfect. You know, if you have a mobile phone like this, you can still enter your keywords and click on the buttons. That's the behavior that we want. So let's look how this can be built. It's really not that complicated if you know which Bootstrap classes to use. And this is really a hands-on example if you have a desktop view and you want to also, in addition, provide a mobile view. So flipping back to Visual Studio Code and putting both the code and the design on the same page so you can see it, we had a row. And this row contained both the edit control and the buttons. And as I emphasized before, the edit control houses the buttons using a so-called input group. And it made sense at the time. However, to be honest with you, it was a bad call with regards to mobile development. So we take this input group out. And also what we did here, we have the class that, for example, for 12 columns, we show the whole thing. And then we group these things differently. But that doesn't make any sense because in this case, the input group ties the buttons to it. So these buttons can't behave independently. That's the problem that we have. So the only thing we achieve with this is different width for the keyword and the buttons, but to make sure that it's not spreading over the whole container. So in this case, a different approach is needed, not using input group. And the key thing I want to remember is design the mobile view first. And on the mobile view, we want, as you saw previously, we want to basically make sure, if I flip over to the second file here, that it's stacked, the input and the buttons. So in order to phrase this in Bootstrap terms, this is a column where the input control takes up the whole row, meaning column 12. And the buttons here, they share the whole 12. Basically, that's in the purview of Bootstrap to calculate that for us. However, the important thing is the edit control takes 12 units and the button takes 12 units. So how can we do that? First, we need to separate the edit control from the buttons. Let's do that. I always type index 1 for whatever reason, it's just index. So we take the input group off. That's the first thing. And if I save this, I immediately see what happens. The text takes up the whole row. If I make this wider, it doesn't change. Why doesn't it change? Well, the thing is that this is its own div, and we need to completely restructure this. So what I do here now is I basically take this div away. That's before the row, like one of them, like this. So this would create a big mess, most likely. No, it doesn't. And then I put this edit control into its own div. So I'm going to say div class mb1, that's fine, call 12, mobile first, right? So here, this is going to be its own div. And of course, in order to make that work, I need to take the div off here. So this is on the row. Let's follow it down here. Yes. And here is, what is this? Oh, this is where the script and all that kind of stuff gets inserted. We don't need to bother with that. So at this point, if we save this, we get this. Why? Well, let me explain it to you. So we have the row, and on this row, we have the input control, and the input control is housed in its own column that takes 12 units. And then if I go on, the buttons, they're always on the row. And what that means is they always will take up 12 units because they're literally on their own row, okay? So what we can do here is we can insert another div with a class of call 12, but we group all the buttons together. So we take all the buttons here and insert them here. And thus, we get this view. Almost good, right? So we have for the mobile view that the buttons share 12 and that the edit control shares 12. So this is almost good. You know, if you were to design this for a whole page, that's going to be the problem. But it looks good, okay? So this would work on desktop too. It's fine. It's better than nothing, right? It definitely behaves better than what we have had before. So this is like the mobile view, and this would be the desktop view. Much better already, but I want the buttons to take up the space underneath. So I want the buttons to fill up the whole column. And we can do that with a tiny little keyword that's also part of Bootstrap. If we go into our div, we can call it a button group and save. And voila, we have told Bootstrap to mend the buttons together and make it a group. And the group takes up the whole 12. So at this point, we have the mobile view set. And I think this already looks pretty good. So the only thing that we need to add now is if we have like a certain width, maybe here, that at this point, the buttons jump right off the images. And that's pretty simple because we can simply say here, as soon as we reach, for example, medium, meaning it gets bigger. So we have call medium 6, and then the buttons take up the other 6, medium 6, because 6 and 6 on the row makes 12. So we save this, and we see that as soon as it gets bigger, the buttons are aligned next to the input control. So at this point, if you're nitpicky, the only thing that seems a bit odd is that the text control here is not as high as the button. The button seems to be stretched a little bit. And if we look here, I have a margin of 1, and that makes sense because if I make it smaller, I want to have a margin here. For example, 3 might be even better, so that the buttons are nicely separated from the edit control. The problem is that stays true for when we have it extended, right? So the solution is we need to add a margin that comes into play for the medium breakpoint. So we say a margin button for the medium breakpoint is 0. So we save this. And at this point, we have a 0 margin at the bottom for the wide, right? And as soon as make it smaller, I have the margin. So whenever you work with Bootstrap, you can remember that if you have something like MB3, for example, you also have MB-MD or LG or XL. All the different classes are always available for different media breakpoints. I don't want to say all because there's always exceptions, right? However, most of them are. So for column 12, this affects anything that's smaller than medium. And as soon as we have the medium size, we say it's only 6 columns of the 12. And because we have 12 units in total, and we only take up 6, the next div can take up the other 6. And that's why they end up next to each other. Okay, we can also look at this with the inspector right here. So we open this up, and then in the row, we get into the flex grid. Then we see we have one column and another column right here. So that's how it looks like, right? So if we now basically make it smaller, what happens is that we have one cell up here and the other up here using the 12 units. And you can also see the margin nicely here, that it gets added underneath the edit control. This is the edit control, and if you go here in the orange, that's the margin. So all perfect. This is exactly the kind of responsiveness that we would like. And I don't need to show it to you that I copied it over into TMS WEB Core, into my existing design. But these kind of fixes, you will always have them. You will never build the perfect design right away, right from the start. And that's why I showed you this video. I wanted to show you, even if I produce a 6-part or whatever, how many parts it were on an image gallery, that at some point I use it on a different device. I thought it would look great, but then all of a sudden, oh boy, it doesn't. And that's why you need user feedback. People need to use your user interface and give you feedback. And of course, never be offended if something didn't work out the way that you thought it would, and just look critically at your own user interface design and make the necessary changes to the classes. Another reason why I showed this is, if you don't get rid of the input group, you will never be successful with this design. The input group ties the button to the edit control, and that makes it impossible to build a responsive design like this. So that took me a while. I mean, I present this in a couple of minutes here. However, until the coin dropped, so to speak, to get rid of the input group and then use a button group, that took me a while. And that isn't something that just came to me. That is something you really have to try out. And that's the reason why I shared this video with you. I hope you liked it. Give us a thumbs up. See you soon. Take care.